Thank you very much, Mariela Schwarzenberg, for this kind invitation. I am really thrilled to be here. Of course, as Ambassador of Mexico to the United States, and also Ambassador from a Latin American country, and Ambassador of the country which has the most meaningful and important relationship with the US. But also as a Reed parent, because Camila, our daughter, is a student here. So we have a very strong motivation to be here today. Being this the parent weekend, we wanted to profit from this opportunity also to share with you some thoughts on this Latin American perspective, as Mariela has envisioned, from Mexico towards our region and the US. And of course, she referred to a very difficult circumstance that Mexico faces today, and we'll maybe talk about that in the Q&A session, which is critical. This is a major, not political crisis, but it is a human rights crisis, and it is a reminder that there are still many issues to be addressed. So in the spirit of never throwing away a crisis, because crises are opportunities to address issues that we have not done so in a skillful way till today. But having said that, I want to thank my dear friend Armando Ortiz Rocha, the Consul General of Mexico in Portland, who is here with us today. And of course, John Kroger, the president of the university, former colleague as the Attorney General of Oregon before joining Reed as its president. But let me start with try to frame these from the Latin American perspective. Mexico is, for sure, a Latin American country. It is Latin American in every single sense of the word. It is Latin American in culture. It is Latin American in identity, in belonging. In Spanish, we have a linguistical distinction which is very relevant for what in English is the verb to be. We have two words, which is to be, estar, and to be, ser. And they are not the same thing, but of course they come together. So we, in that sense, are Latin American, no doubt. But we are in North America, no doubt. And geography is destiny. There is nothing we can do about that. We can be forgiven by history, and we have had a sometimes difficult history, but never by geography. In that sense, let me start with two quotes. One from the well-known Mexican dictator, Porfirio Diaz. He governed Mexico from 1872 and then with 4 years recess, and then all the way until 1910. And he said that poor Mexico, so far from God, so close to the United States. And then when President of Israel, Shimon Peres, heard these words, he was then prime minister, not president, he has just stepped down. He said, no, you're totally wrong. You don't get the picture. Poor Israel, so close to God, so far from the United States. So everything is a matter of perspective. For us, being close to the United States has been, for the most, a blessing. It is a very difficult relationship, but it is a blessing because we have actually merged very well in terms of this geographical, political, cultural, and social fabric reality, which is called North America. Mexico, in that sense, has a very strong link with North America, and today I wanted to address this issue of this shared economic and social space called North America. So from this I will try to give you some perspective in terms of what it means, essentially half of us, half of Mexicans have relatives in the US. This is, of course, just coming from the fact that we have had a very strong migration into the US, which was historically very important. It is not anymore in terms of flows, but it is very important in terms of the number of Mexicans and Mexican Americans already here. And of course, today, still a fifth of Mexicans receive remittances from the US. These remittances have gone down like 30% from their peak back in 2003, 2002, and they are still going down, but still very important in terms of support to poor families, particularly in areas which are not in the best shape economically. And of course, most of us think that the US is the best economic model, and still a large number think that this is the most important region for us. And of course, even though we would never choose another nationality, if we would choose one, it would be American. So we have a very large Mexican population here. We have just below 11 million Mexican-born citizens here. But we have 35 million Mexican origin people in the US. This is roughly 13% of total US population. So this essentially illustrates very well how important it is for us to engage socially with the US and how important our people think the US is. And of course, these 35 million people who live in America actually contribute with 8% of total US GDP, which is below the share of the total population. And this is explained from the fact that their median incomes are lower than the median incomes for ordinary Americans, but also and mainly because this is a very young population. So we have a very large population, but only 14,000 Mexican students in the US. We will touch this later, but America has 835,000 foreign students as we speak, doing college or postgrad, and we only have 14,000. Being a country of 114 million just south of the border, it really doesn't make much sense. But also, Mexico is very important for the US. We have the largest American community abroad, over 1 million. Some of them undocumented and working. If you go to Cancun and to the Riviera Maya and you see guys actually offering you timeshares, well, they don't necessarily have working permits, but this is part of the reality and how vibrant this relationship is. 6.4 million visited Mexico in 2013, airborne, because actually through the border it was much more than that. But still, we dropped from number 1 to number 4 as Americans going to Latin America to study. So this is something that we have to look at as well. We have an immense trade. We trade a lot with each other. It's actually this year it's going to be $545 billion, over $1 million a minute of trade among our two countries. 25 of the 50 states in the US have Mexico as number 1 or number 2 export destination, top export destination. And according to the US Chamber of Commerce, at least 6 million US jobs depend on how much Mexico buys from the US. So this number is really related to exports from the US to Mexico. The foreign investment is huge. Of course, the US is the number 1 foreign investor in Mexico, $160 billion cumulative. And Mexican foreign investment from 2008 to 12 almost reached $15 billion. We have many Mexican large companies, Mission Foods, the largest tortilla manufacturer company in the world that actually produces more tortillas in the US than it does in Mexico. Or Bimbo Bakeries, which is the largest baker in the US, is actually the largest baker in the world. And of course, they have 65 manufacturing facilities in the US, 43 in Mexico. So they are larger here. Cemex, I mean, we have many other companies that are quite relevant here. Where we are? Well, of course, the US, in terms of trading, if you add exports plus imports, the number one area with which the US trades is North America, Canada and Mexico. Canada is the number one trading partner for the US with $632 billion, followed in terms of as a trading partner, adding imports and exports, China, and then Mexico. But of course, Mexico is the second largest market for the US, so we are your second largest customer. We will surpass Canada quite soon, just because of demographics. We are a country of 117 million people now, and raising middle class, and median age is quite low. So in this sense, we will be your number one customer. And in business school, they teach you that you have to take care of your customers well. Well, we try to do that with you because you are our number one customer, but we are your number two customer, and we will be number one. Actually, it is impressive, but Mexico buys from the US almost as much as Europe, and we will surpass Europe as well. We buy more from the US than China and Japan combined. Actually, Texas sells more to Mexico than the whole US to China. And this is growing. Every single year, our trade in this sense grows like 8% a year, so it is quite dramatic. So we are a very important economic partner, and of course growing in relevance. If you see, of course, as I said, if you see the exports from the US to other regions, we buy more from the US than the BRICS combined. So Brazil, India, Russia, and South Africa together. As I said, Japan and China, if you add Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, we buy more from the US than they do. And of course, I am a soccer fan. We love football. And if you add up all the countries that have won the FIFA World Cup in history, well, we buy more from you than they do combined. But just wait, we will win the next one. So, and of course, our trade has grown from a trade pact that is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. In January the 1st, 1994, our North American Free Trade Agreement entered into force. And this has been a very dramatic engine for economic interaction, that it grew from 40 billion or so to 281 billion in exports and 226 billion in imports. So it's a huge advance. And of course, as I said, Mexico's top 5 export destination for 37 states. So this is not only a border, southwest border issue. Of course, the southwest border states do have a larger presence in Mexico. This is only natural from the border interaction and geography, but this is also the case for most of the US that deals with agricultural products and also with manufacturing. But this is not only the case for trade. We actually do not trade a lot only. We produce together to actually serve together this market and other markets. You buy a lot of products from China. We do as well, everyone does. But when you buy a product from China, the US value added into those products is 4%. It doesn't really get any better when you buy products from Europe or Japan or Brazil, because the US value added into those products that are sold to the US is 2%. It is a very different story from Canada, because Canada has been integrated with the US in terms of manufacturing and production for a long time. 1965, the Auto Pact, and from then until NAFTA that we are partners in this trade agreement. So when you buy a Canadian product, every single product, this is a median value for all exports, is 25%. But when you buy a product from Mexico, the US value added is 40%. So 4 China, 40 Mexico. Mexico is the 4th largest automobile exporter in the world. But there is not such a thing as a Mexican car. They might be assembled in Hermosillo or in Silao, and there is not such a thing as an American car, because systems, parts, and components go back and forth the border many times before you and me or a consumer can identify something as a car to buy. It is a really shared production. It is a very effectively integrated value-added chain in manufacturing. Automobiles, of course, is the most important sector. Electric, electronic, household appliances, and more recently, aerospace. And this is an equation that works because we combine the competitive advantages of the 3 countries, because Canada is also part of this equation, in a very competitive way. So it is important to understand the level of integration that we have. So also, in terms of exporting to third parties, every single export from Mexico, including oil, so this is not only manufacturing, this is everything, agricultural products. 13% of all exports from Mexico to third parties comes from the US. If it is manufacturing, it's 38%. And as said, from China, it is really only below, just about 4%. And Canada, if you see the exports to third parties, is 9.2%. This is the states in which Mexico is relevant in terms of job creation, Texas and California, but also many countries, many states in the Northeast. It's over 6 million US jobs that depend on how much Mexico buys from the US. And this, when I look at these figures, I always remember when we were negotiating NAFTA, we had the presidential debate here in the US, and we had this friend from Texas, Ross Perot, that famously said in one debate that NAFTA was going to be a terrible idea because he was already listening to the silent sucking sound of Mexico getting US jobs into our country. Well, the only silent sucking sound I see and hear in Mexico is Mexican consumers getting rid of US goods on a daily basis. So this has been a totally different equation. It has really helped the region and certainly both countries in this respect. Also, we have a tremendously connected environment. We have 220,000 flights per year between Mexico and the US that connect 83 cities in the US with 35 cities in Mexico. Actually, just in January, August 2014, from Mexico to the US, we grew 6% and we grew 5.4% in the same period from the US to Mexico. And we have just completed last week negotiating new reciprocal air service agreement, what is called the open sky. It's not an open sky because it's regulated, but we have opened the opportunities for Mexican airlines and US airlines to actually serve the markets in a much better fashion. And this will grow, I would say, in a dramatic way, looking towards the future. in this sense, we have from different states and sectors, regions in the US, moved lots of US passengers, over 10.5 million in 2013, and of course, most of them going to the Riviera Maya. Cancun receives more international passengers than Mexico City, but Mexico City is still quite large. We have the challenge here to develop other destinations. Of course, Los Cabos, which is a very popular destination for American tourists, and Puerto Vallarta, Vallarta Nayarit, the Pacific coast, with much warmer water and seashore than the California stream in Los Cabos. Of course, this brings us to our social fabric. We share, of course, a highly and very effectively integrated value-added chain in manufacturing. We trade a lot in agricultural products, but essentially we share a people. 54 million Hispanics in the US, which is roughly 17% of total US population, out of which 35 million roughly, this is the number for 2014, are Mexican origin. From these, just 11.5 million were born in Mexico, and the rest are Mexican Americans born here from Mexican origin. So we have, in terms of Hispanics, theoretically 25.2 million US citizens from Hispanic origin eligible to vote in 2014, but what is most important is that almost 65,000 Latino kids born in the US who are American citizens turn 18 every single month, and this is quite important in this sense. The US demographics show this in a very strong way. If you see, the US has a very dynamic and very positive demographic dynamic. It will grow from 2010 to 2050. This is not counting immigration. This is counting the fertility rates, median ages, and different groups. 42% from 2010 to 2050. The African American community will grow 56%. The African American community here is 33 years old median age. Asians are 29 years old median age, and they will grow 142%. And Hispanic, which is 27 years old median age, exactly the same as Mexico, will grow 167%, while the non-Hispanic white population will grow 1%. The median age for non-Hispanic whites is 40 years old, is essentially the same as Europe. So in this sense, the growth in the total US population will come mainly from, Hispanics are going to be 50% of total population growth, and this is quite important because the links and the social fabric among our countries in this sense, as I would say 65%, 70% of these Hispanics are from Mexican origin. I have to say that as we have 11.5 million born in Mexico, median age of total people in the US is 37 years old. Median age of those of us born in Mexico but living here, some of us for a brief period like the consul or me, is 38. But those of Mexican origin born in the US, median age is 17. So they are really very young. I was looking at the numbers in Oregon, because Oregon has, according to the census, just below 4 million people, 466,000 Hispanics. Median age of these Hispanics in Oregon is 23. 65% of these Hispanics in Oregon are or were born here, while 35 were born elsewhere, 80% in Mexico, and of course you have people from Central America. So the proportion of Hispanics in Oregon is below the median values in the US, well below California, which is 40%. The median value is 17%, and here is just above 12% of Hispanics in this state. But they are certainly quite young. But are Mexicans in the US a burden to the economy? Well, we have a lot of misconceptions here. Actually, 12%, this is Small Business Administration numbers, of total US small businesses are owned by Mexican Americans. 87% of total income of Mexican-born people in the US is spent here. And they pay $11.2 billion in local and federal taxes in 2010. Is this an endless flow? Well, no. Actually, the Mexican-born population in the US is almost 1 million less people today than it was in 2007. Many of them went back on their own will, particularly from the economic crisis in 2009, 2010, and some went back with a little help from ICE. But the fact is that Mexico is not a major supplier of migrants into the US today, is not going to be a major supplier of migrants into the US into the future. And the reason behind this is not only that it's more difficult to cross the border, or that Mexico is doing much better in terms of job creation, as it is, and certainly the job creation rate in the US is not as good today as it was in the 90s, but that Mexican fertility rates dropped dramatically. I come from a family of 9 siblings. My wife comes from a family of 6. So in the 90s, the fertility rate for Mexican women was 7 children per woman in fertile age. Today is 2.2, so just above the US, which is 2.08. Replacement is 2.1, because you need slightly more boys than girls, because we have a tendency to survive pregnancy better, but we have a higher infant mortality rate for boys than girls, and then it gets leveled again. And at the end, girls are better, so they survive us for sure. So even Mexican undocumented population in the US, which peaked 6.9 million, is down to 5.9 million. And if you see the flows, I was said the chief negotiator of the Border Safety Agreement back in 2002. And we were using the reference of the year 2000. I know the border well, and I knew all our friends from the Border Patrol. The Border Patrol had in the year 2000 4,500 Border Patrol officers deployed in the southwest border. They apprehended 1.7 million people in the year 2000. 95% of them Mexicans. In the year 2012, we had the wall, 640 miles of wall, the drones and the videos, and we have 20,500 Border Patrol officers. We have 22,000 today. And they apprehended 386,000 people. And the absolute numbers of flows went down dramatically. Of this number, less than half were Mexicans. Even more so, it has gone a little bit up, so it's above 400,000 today, but around 35% of them are Mexicans, from 95% to 35%. So net flow of migrants from Mexico to the US is negative. We have more people going back than coming north. And our community has really matured. You have a totally different community here. Most of these Mexican origin and Mexican people are well integrated into their communities. They are I would say, American in every single sense of the word, regardless of passport, because they are not less Mexican, but being American in that sense is really embracing an idea and embracing the ideals of this country. And this country is as great as it is because it has historically embraced migrants from all over the world that have come here with the right approach. If you have a job description for a migrant, you would see that they are innovative, creative, very hardworking, and risk takers. So exactly the same definition of an entrepreneur. They have no choice. If they don't do that, they do not survive. So in that sense, it is precisely in the roots of the US that having had migrants from all over the world throughout its history has provided this fantastic, I would say, environment for innovation, creativity, flexibility. This is, in that sense, the most amazing country in the world, precisely because of that. We have 3.5 million Mexican nationals, which are green card holders, that are eligible for citizenship, that have not chosen to do so for many different reasons. But 135,000 became legal residents in 2013, and we have a very large consular network in the US. We have 50 consulates, 49 throughout the US and 1 in the Mexican embassy in Washington. No country has a network of consular offices as large as we have in the US, 50. And we will open the 51st in Milwaukee in the first quarter of next year. And this is, of course, for a reason. We need offices to provide services to a very large Mexican community here in terms of the documentation, in terms of helping them to integrate better into their community of choice. We share a border which is quite intense and quite complex. It is a 2,000-mile long border. It is very complex. It comprises 10 states in both countries, 14 million people, 60% of them in the US, 40% in Mexico. And it would be, if considered as a unit, the 4th largest economy in the world. So this is the busiest border in the world. It has over 1 million people crossing this border legally on a daily basis. 350,000 cars, trucks, and railroad cars cross that border legally on a daily basis. So this is a very intense border. No other border in the world has this intensity. No other border in the world has this intensity. But it is very complex. And of course, trade has set $1 million a minute and growing in terms of volume 8% a year. And we still have tremendous challenges. It takes 22 hours for a truck to move from Chicago to Ciudad Juárez. And then it takes 9 hours for the same truck to cross to Mexico. And twice that number of hours, 18 hours, to cross from Mexico to the US. This is nonsense. We have a 21st century trade in terms of complexity, in terms of the effectiveness of the integration of the value-added chain, on top of a 20th century regulatory framework, NAFTA, of course, but many other regulations that we have developed together. But it is really working on top of a 19th century infrastructure for the most. We're opening in a few weeks the first rail crossing between Mexico and the US in 100 years. This is nonsense. We have improved our infrastructure, but still we have tremendous challenges. The cost of crossing the border is way too high, and we can make it much better. This will enhance our competitiveness because, as we have tried to explain, we are competitive together because we actually combine the competitive edges of both countries, the whole region. So we have a tremendous challenge here. Where are we going? Well, I am very much obsessed with demographics. This is one of my favorite topics. If we combine the total number of people of the US, Canada, and Mexico, today we are 482 million people. But it is important here to go to the details. The US has, we picked the 2012 numbers just because the fact book that we use is referred to that date. So we are in the US today like 318 million, but back in 2012 it was 314 million people. Median age in the US 37.1, and fertility rate 2.06. Mexico, in 2012, we were 115 million people. Median age 27, so 10 years younger than the US. Fertility rate 2.27, which is has geographical variations. In Mexico City is 1.8. In Oaxaca is 3.2. So it combines at a total of 2.2. Canada, median age 41.2, so 1 year older than the median value in Europe. 34 million people, 1.59 kids per woman fertility rate. So it's quite low. But combined, the equation of geography, resources, and demographic dynamics in our region is fantastic. If you see the shape of our age distribution of the NAFTA region, the North American region, is quite healthy. And then we go to China. China has essentially the same geographical extension than the US, 9 million square kilometers, 1.38 billion people in 2012. But median age in China is 34, so just 3 years younger than the US. But the fertility rate in China is 1.55, so it's essentially the same as Canada. It's essentially the same as most of Europe. And moreover, the gender distribution of newborns in China is awkward because of the one-child policy, but also because it is very much in the mindset. Normal distribution in the world, the US, Canada, the UK, France, Mexico, Brazil, typically has 105 boys per 100 girls. This is actually mammals. All mammals have the same median distribution. In China, you have 113 boys per 100 girls with a fertility rate of 1.5 and a median age of 34. It means that in China, you will have a population that will get old before they get rich. This is a quotation from a very famous Chinese economist. And they will shrink. Actually, the population in the US, as shown in a previous chart, will grow 42%, but the population in China will shrink. If they keep with this fertility rate and this distribution of gender distribution of newborns, the population in 2050 will be just 860 million, with a median age of around 57 years old. So this is going to be quite challenging. China is going to grow more than any other country in the world the next 20 years. This is a given. There is no doubt about that. And of course, they are advancing in many other ways, but they face a challenge in the demographic perspective. And North America, in this sense, has a fantastic balance between geography, resources, in particular energy, and of course demographics. If you compare also NAFTA with the European Union, you have a similar picture. Of course, this is not a surprise in the European Union, which is essentially 40 years old median age with differences between countries. Surprisingly for me, the younger countries in Europe are France and the UK, 39, and the oldest is Germany, 45, as Japan, which is almost 46. I was reading a report from the OECD that Japan, actually last year, more Japanese died than were born. So Japan is already shrinking. This is, I mean, there is nothing really bad or good in terms of this, except that you face the tremendous challenge of deflation. When families actually grow old and they have homes and they have nothing, no one to actually buy their homes or inherit their homes, those homes collapse in value. If they do, all homes collapse in value because the total assets of homes in a certain economy that is deflating go down in value, and this is shrinking the balance sheet of a country. And this is really a nightmare in terms of economic perspective. You actually need new families to enter the economy because new families are the ones who demand homes, cars, household appliances, and therefore create the opportunity for manufacturing and produce and build those goods. If you don't have new families, this is going to be quite challenging. It's not that you cannot deal with that in a different manner, but in terms of wealth creation and welfare creation, it's going to be challenging. Also, in terms of projected GDP, Mexico today is the 14th largest economy in the world. This is nominal GDP 1.1, purchase parity is 1.3, but it is projected to be number 9, the 9th largest economy in the world by 2028, and the 7th largest economy by 2050. This is the combination of growth and demographics. And of course, the median ages, in that sense, Mexico will be larger in terms of total economic production than Germany, France, or the UK. One of the most important advantages of our region is energy. We have abundant resources in North America, but energy in particular is quite interesting. As a region, North America is the only region that is expected to switch from being a net importer to be a net exporter of energy by 2020. Neutral in liquid, in oil, and a net exporter in gas. And you see the resources here, of course, in North America. There are other regions of the world that have huge resources, but in terms of the balance of production and then consumption, this region is very well positioned. Actually, our prices for energy in the region, we price our natural gas in Mexico at the same prices of the US. It's just that we are not yet producing enough gas. The energy reform that was just passed will, of course, change this dramatically, but we are building 2 major pipelines from the US to Mexico to ship gas from the US to Mexico and therefore reduce our cost of production. Mexican manufacturers, except for those that can actually produce their own energy, that have to buy their electricity from the public utility, pay 75% higher prices than their competitors in the US. With this, we will be able to be, of course, much more competitive. Energy is a very relevant component of cost in manufacturing and services, but then if we can get those costs down. We are now trying to do the same with Central America. Central America actually pays 4 to 5 times US prices for electricity. We're building a pipeline from Salina Cruz in southern Mexico to Guatemala, and then with a condition to actually extend this further south to change the energy equation in Central America, because that's going to be the only way to change the development equation in that region. That I always say North America, of course, starts in Mexico geographically, but in terms of the development equation and security equation, it starts in the Darién, not in the Suchiate. The Suchiate is the river that divides Mexico and Guatemala. The Darién is the jungle that divides Panama and Colombia. If we don't add Central America into this equation, it's going to be very difficult for the region as a whole to really solve the development and security equation. So in this sense, in terms of energy, of course, with this reform, we have significant shale resources. We have the 8th largest shale resource country for liquids and the 6th largest for gas. We have not exploited these resources because they were reserved for the state through a public entity. We just passed a constitutional amendment and then the enabling legislation, and now we are already starting the bidding process for those companies, private companies, foreign and domestic, that will partner with Pemex or will go on their own in licensing schemes to actually exploit this fantastic gift from nature and God. We have actually embraced major structural reforms these last 2 years, reforms that were unthinkable. I was interviewed by the Financial Times when I was ambassador in London, early 2012, and they asked me, well, what about energy? Energy is the most relevant pending issue in Mexico. Do you think that Mexico will actually open its energy sector to private investment? And my answer was, with no doubt, not in my lifetime. Well, here we are, I'm alive, and we actually managed. And this reform process, and this is relevant also for the challenges ahead, was not only that we have a very smart president and very smart technocrats and politicians actually doing this. This is a combination of leadership and compromise. This what should be politics 101, and it's not. Mexico has not had a majority in Congress since 1997. So there is no way to pass anything, not only meaningful, anything, through Congress without compromising with other political forces. So from the day he was elected, President Peña Nieto started to interact with other political parties, define an agenda, and then embrace reform. Sometimes, for some reforms, unanimously, education. Some reforms with the support of the left, taxes. Sometimes with the support of the right, oil and energy. But at the end, we were able to put these decisions to consideration of Congress and then get them through. I think this circumstance is critical looking towards the future, particularly when we redesign the security and federalism equation in the country. But we were able to pass meaningful reforms: labor, energy, financial tax, education, telecom, and of course the mother of all reforms, energy, to actually reduce transaction cost and remove barriers of entrance, to increase productivity. The president has said to democratize productivity, which is really a way to say democratize the ability to actually profit from a growing economy, not only for a few group of companies that are modern and can actually have the critical mass and the ability to do so, but for anyone. And of course, for instance, the reform in competition, the antitrust reform, is critical. I was part of the commission that drafted the first antitrust law, modern law in modern Mexico. That was 23 years ago. And we had a good law. We said that our law had, afterwards, had teeth, but had no jaws. Today, reform has teeth and jaws. This is an independent body. We amended the Constitution so those affected by the decisions of this independent body cannot ask for constitutional protection. And this is the way actually to crack vested interest and sectors of the economy which are in many senses taken. And we need much more competition here. So looking forward, in terms of the new agenda, we need to improve competitiveness and ties between societies, the political dialogue between Mexico, the US, and Canada, cooperation to build up the 21st century border, to have promotion, and of course links with Mexicans living abroad. in this sense, we have improved integration of Mexican communities into the US and a new agenda, creating synergies for development. We have a few tools, the high-level economic dialogue, which was started by President Peña and President Obama in May last year, which is exactly establishing an agenda, a roadmap for the two countries to actually reduce transaction costs and improve the competitiveness of the region in many different areas. The Bilateral Forum on Higher Education, Innovation and Research, the FOBESI by its Spanish acronym, and of course the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Council, and a border action plan which has been established this year in 2014. Just to briefly state that in higher education, the US, President Obama has established the 100,000 strong in the Americas, which is the goal to have 100,000 students from the Americas coming to the US, and we have Proyecta 100,000, which is the goal to have by 2018 100,000 Mexican students in the US, not only doing full courses or BAs or postgraduate, but also training courses and skill courses or stays or interchanges within their university degrees, and 50,000 Americans in Mexico also. We have advanced here, and we have had many different understanding and agreements between universities, and I think this is moving forward quite promising. Of course, financing is always a challenge, but it is surprising that we have found ways to do this in a much faster pace than we thought originally. We also have an institutional evolution and how we see our own consular network, 50 consulates, as I said, to improve the image of Mexico, to empower our communities, help them integrate into the US, and of course, modernize the way we provide services. We use smartphones which help our nationals to get their the information they need, and of course their appointments to get their documentation. We have the North American Leaders Summit. This was in Toluca earlier this year. We will meet again in Ottawa in February to advance in this agenda, which is essentially focused on shared and inclusive prosperity, new areas of opportunity, citizen security, and regional and global issues. And of course, this is just a list of the different initiatives that we have listed or ambition for the North American integration. At the end, the basic message I want to leave you with is I am convinced that the most competitive area in the world looking forward is not in Asia, it's not China, it's here and it's us. Thank you very much.